2019 AD was a year in which many things happened, and some of those things were sim racing. It was a year that saw a new simulator find inventive ways to divide the community, the announcement of a game-changing product, and for some reason, LEGO DLC for Forza Horizon. I covered some of those things at the time, and since it's the end of the year, here's an incomplete and slightly tongue-in-cheek look back at some of those things. ', 2019 kicked off with an announcement by Project Cars developer and part-time Galactic Empire roleplayers Slightly Mad Studios. The Madbox, and its impressive understatement of a name, was to be a high-end gaming console with PC-like performance designed to take on the next generation of consoles from Sony and Microsoft. A ballsy endeavour for a company with a list of hardware experience that could be filled out in triplicate on a postage stamp with room to spare for a dirty limerick or two. And, surprising literally no one, it wasn't long before the project fell into difficulty and then later obscurity. But while we were all having a good laugh at the Madbox, a man called Peter Bose quietly released a mod for Assetto Corsa that would prove to reanimate the still-warm body of the much-loved but much-abandoned Italian racing sim. Sol, a brilliant environmental mod that made use of the completely indescriptively named shaders patch by Ilya, really did prove to be the breath of fresh air that Assetto Corsa needed. Not only did it look like a cold beer at the end of a hard day's work in the sun, but the two mods brought with them much needed functionality to the sim. Meanwhile, the aforementioned Italians were working on their own piece of eye candy, and January saw Build 5 of the Assetto Corsa Competizione beta and the beautiful Emil Frey Jaguar. I loved it. So much so that I let my pretentious side show just a little bit too much, describing it as a grafter's car that would be of no use to those seeking instant gratification. Ugh. And while I'm on the subject of saying ill-advised things, I also announced the imminent arrival of the United Racing Design BMW M8 GTE in a preview video in January, and then spent the next 6 months fielding hundreds of questions about when it would show up, which I guess it eventually did. I'd like to say that was the last time I made that mistake in 2019. I'd like to say that. While January was full of announcements, releases and whatever that was, in February, bugger all happened. ACC Build 6 got delayed, which generated a surprising amount of understanding from the community, making message boards look at least temporarily like something we'd all look back upon fondly after the downfall of civilization. But that Werther's original style pre-nostalgia wouldn't last long. Perhaps everyone was distracted by F1 testing in the annual Ferrari are going to be the team to beat stories in the press. I forget how that one turned out because I myself was distracted by hitting the 10k subscribers milestone. Surprisingly, this didn't make it any easier to use the phrase "I'm a YouTuber" at parties without feeling like a toddler that's just proudly proclaimed that he wants to be a McFlurry when he grows up. March was also comparatively quiet, so I took the opportunity to confuse those that had me pegged as a shill for Kunos by making a couple of preview videos for some upcoming race room content. These were some of my favourite videos of the year, and I'm still incredibly proud of them. However, any feeling of professional pride was short-lived. The delayed Build 6 of Assetto Corsa Competizione hit, and as had become customary, I pulled an all-nighter to scrape together a video to satiate the voracious YouTube algorithm monster. At some point in the small hours of the morning, my editing SSD died, along with all of the footage and my last fleeting glimmer of optimism. I'd like to say that was the last time I had an SSD failure that resulted in corrupted footage in 2019. I'd like to say that. Still, it wasn't all bad, and by the end of the month we could all play Automobilista content in R-Factor. Spring had begun springing in the UK, but alas, not so in Italy, where I found myself the Assetto Corsa Competizione launch party, and a surprise gig talking about sim racing while people did sim racing in front of me. The SRO Esports GT series was my introduction to the world of professional esports, and would dominate much of the rest of the year for me, not least of all because of the unwieldy name. The Stefan Rattel organisation Electronic Sport Grand Touring Series, as literally nobody called it, took me to some of Europe's most beloved racing venues, introduced me to some amazing people, and provided an opportunity to see some of the world's best sim racers ply their trade. In the words of my co-commentator, it were epic. But enough about me. The other big piece of news in April was the announcement that SimuCube were back and they were launching a dedicated direct drive wheel system to a dystopian future near you. If you're watching this in 2022, wasn't their picture of the future eerily accurate? May kicked off with the feel-good news that over 10,000 mods for Assetto Corsa had been made by the community and hosted on Race Department, and there are still a few that Mike SimRacing 604 is yet to review. In the world of official content, Studio 397 released a rather pleasing version of the Monaco E-Prix circuit to go along with their Gen 1 and Gen 2 Formula E cars, and Assetto Corsa Competizione finally left beta and took its first careful steps into the world of version numbers beginning with a 1. With ACC now out of the oven, there was brief concern amongst semi-professional random opinion generators like myself that there would be nothing to rampantly speculate about in the near future. Enter Riser. Automobilista 2 was a bit of an open secret, but the bombshell they dropped in May left more than a few eyebrows raised with sufficient vigour to cause long-lasting muscular damage. Resting SimRacer Face, as it probably wasn't known, was a reaction to the news that Riser would be using the Madness engine for AMS2. Yeah, the Madness engine. Those guys. Once we'd all gotten over the confusion about the AMS2 announcement and collectively decided that it would probably all work out great in the end, June was upon us. For me, that meant more esports, with a trip to Paul Ricard for the SRO Esport and to Le Mans for the Le Mans Esports Series final and the 24 hours. Not a bad couple of weeks. But all of that travel meant that I wasn't around to review one of the biggest circuit releases of the year, Le Sarthe for R-Factor 2, which is a painstakingly constructed work of art. But there was another release in June that I missed out on, something that was arguably even more culturally significant than Le Mans in R-Factor, something that if you cut it open would bleed a mixture of class, refinement and product placement. I am of course talking about LEGO Speed Champions for Forza Horizon. In July, sim racers were preoccupied with this pound shop Gandalf character and his increasingly public tiff with Haas F1. Equally compelling and confusing was the news that a company with about as much backstory as Rich Energy, called Modern Pick Entertainment, had intended to buy out Slightly Mad Studios for north of $100 million, an impressive amount of money for a sim racing developer. Though in the end little seemed to come of the deal, but more on that later. The big sim racing release in July was the much publicised FIA European Truck Racing Championship game. When I say big, I mean big in terms of the vehicles, because the game itself was a bit light on content and features. I seem to recall describing it as positively as I could as a Steam sale purchase. August was pretty quiet in the sim racing world because everyone seemed to be focusing on. September meant it was time for the annual industry drunkening that masquerades as a trade event. Sim Racing Expo, held at the Nürburgring, means that there was a flurry of announcements and releases that are timed to coincide with it. I was there for the SRO Esport GT series, but got to spend a little time at the Expo and meet lots of amazing members of the community. And like seemingly every other sim racing YouTuber in Europe, this was the year I finally got to drive the Nordschleife for the first time, thanks to some excellent negotiating by the race department team. In the words of the man that made it happen, it were epic. September also saw a load of buzz about the new Grid game, as Codemasters had the bright idea to invite a bunch of influencers down the pub for a quick game or two. It seemed to work. In sim racing releases, iRacing brought the impressive Audi RS3 to the table, and Studio 397 released their long-awaited version of the Nordschleife, which I don't have any footage of because I was busy travelling to Barcelona for the SRO Esport GT Series final. I won't talk about that here because you guys have made it pretty clear that you think esports is about as interesting as watching cornflakes exist. September was a pretty dense month for sim racing news, and rolling into October was no different. The story that sticks out for me, looking back, is this. To mark the occasion of reaching 300,000 subscribers on YouTube, professional shed enthusiast Jimmy Broadbent set up a charity race to raise money for a deeply personal cause. To date, that appeal has raised over £34,000 for the mental health charity Mind, a heartwarming endorsement of the size, strength and generosity of the sim racing community. With the September release madness spilling into October, we were greeted with the 2019 season update for Assetto Corsa Competizione and the surprise addition of the McLaren 720S, part of a tie-in with the McLaren Shadow Esport project. Race Room got the fantastic Bilsterberg circuit, a tilkodrome that you wouldn't be ashamed to bring home and meet the parents, and Spa was added to GT Sport. This prompted a wave of confusion amongst those of us without a PS4 who just kind of presumed that Spa would have already been included from the get-go. For me though, the big story from October was the release of the IER P13C prototype for Assetto Corsa, a wonderful car that made use of extensive physics rewrites to make what is undisputably the most advanced car in Assetto Corsa to date. November brought us more Slightly Mad Studios news. They'd been bought, and this time by a company you've heard of, and a company that takes you down the pub. I also lost my second SSD of the year and my second set of footage. This was, thankfully, the last time. The year rounded out with another flurry of releases. New BMWs appeared in R-Factor 2 and Race Room, which I didn't feature because I was busy playing with iRacing's excellent new AI. Yes, their previously online-only iRacing finally released their long-teased AI update. Well, some of it. But what was there was good, which prompted YouTube chimps like me to say nice things about it. Honestly, we're like toddlers. Jingle some keys near us and we'll make a video about it. Speaking of which, Assetto Corsa Competizione got a whole host of important physics tweaks, which was great but boring to look at, so instead I focused on the new paint shop. And finally, to round out the year in style, the CHSR Discord community ran a Christmas race at seemingly global warming impacted Brands Hatch with a load of delivery vans. It was eventful. In fact, 2019 was eventful and I loved every second of it. Thank you so much for tuning in this year, guys. It means the world to me. So I guess all that's left to say is goodbye, thanks for watching, and enjoy 2020.